Welcome to Plum Tree Yarn Shop's designer interview series. This is our third in the series, and we are delighted today to welcome Marin Melchior. To back up, I'm Bobby Priest-Gaines, Debbie with my friend Debbie RENNERT from Plum Tree Yarn Shop. Marin Melchior from MarinJa Knits. How are you today?
I'm good. It's warm here in Vermont, but you know, hard to complain when the weather's nice. Exactly.
That is true. We've had a lot. So one of the things that we love about you and your designs in particular is this wonderful, wonderful Papillon shawl. This is one that we have in our shop. It's knit by one of our customers, Don Kreiner. And we have so many people that come into the shop and say, oh, I love that pattern. Oh, I could never do that. And I'm just wondering, you know, we encourage them, but how would you encourage someone who's a little bit afraid to jump into something that might be a little bit of a stretch for them? How do you encourage them to be brave and just jump right in?
Well, I think that there are, in answer to that, there are a few levels to the question. So technical skill-wise, mostly it's knitting because it's in garter. So to me, that makes it a little more simple. Most people know how to do an increase. So whether that increase is a yarn over or a make one left and right or a knit front and back, right? I mean, there are many ways to tackle that. That is a necessary skill for the pattern, but to me, not very hard to learn and not super advanced. And then of course the short rows with the wrap and turn, either a German short row or a wrap and turn are required to know. But really what people seem to find most challenging is the counting aspect. So everyone says, oh, I can count, no problem. I do get a lot of messages saying your pattern's wrong. I'm not coming up with the right stitch count. And I totally respect that. And there was a point in history of the pattern where I needed to go in and verify if the pattern was wrong or if the customer was wrong, because I'm, you know, sidebar, very dyslexic. So what I see and what I can do and what the knitting is telling me versus what I am writing down correctly or incorrectly, it is a little bit of a challenge. At this point, the pattern is very strong. So I know that I can say, well, you know, if you're 2 stitches off, you might have missed a short row. If you're 10 stitches off, your short rows were probably in the wrong place. But the hardest thing is for people, it's like turning a heel in a sock. You just need to do those short row sections kind of in a vacuum. You need to do them when you're not being distracted. Watching TV, drinking wine, you know, being in a social knit setting are really difficult for this pattern, although there are, for every set of, you know, crazy little shapes and intense pieces, there are basically 3 garter rows that you do that might have an increase in them, but that are essentially just knitting. So if you don't like, I mean, if you want to knit something that is all garter stitch where you cast on and all you do is knit, this is not, you could be a very advanced knitter. And if that's what you're looking for in your project or your next project, this is not really what you want to pick up. But I've had new knitters do it and find success in it. So you have to be, I don't want to say it's not complex. I think that there are a lot of clues within the pattern that help you and hold your hand and tell you that you're in the right place. Some short row patterns don't really tell you which side of the work you're on and things like that. I try to put a lot of clues in about how many stitches you should have and which side of the work you're on to try to help you not lose track of your place, but I lose track of my place sometimes because I turn my brain off thinking, oh, I know this, I'm just gonna zip right through it. I find too, often people have trouble further in when they start to feel comfortable, or they'll make one and have no problems, and on their second version they have all sorts of problems. So it really demands, you know, it's like babysitting for a toddler. You have to watch it every second, because it's a busy, demanding piece of work. But technically it's not, I don't think it's that hard. I mean, there are a lot of cables, or there are a lot of other things that I think are more complex. Knitting skill wise, these skills are tracking and attention and following the pattern and counting. So for some people, that's not desirable at all. For some people, it's not really desirable, but they still want to make it. So how advanced of a knitter you are, to me, is not quite as concrete as how much focus you can give to this particular project.
I read over the pattern, and customers who come in and see the shawl we have there, they're commenting overall, they look at it and think this must be really, really hard. So I'll tell them, you know, you start right up here and you start counting and you use markers, and your pattern is very well written. And I like how you say in the beginning not to read through the whole pattern. Don't get boggled down in 10 pages or however long it is. Just go step by step. And that really holds true with this pattern. It isn't technically a hard pattern, but you do have to pay attention. But you've really done your homework in designing it and making it easy for even a beginning knitter to follow along with it. So I like that.
A challenge for me also was not to make it so long that either people didn't want to print it or put so much precursor in it that it became an overwhelming sort of nightmare. I am much more of a jump right in and just start it. Which isn't always good. I am not a pre-reader of patterns, but this one is one where it doesn't necessarily make sense how you can start a section with X number and finish it with Y number, because you're not necessarily going through and counting all the increases or seeing everything that's happening. And it's not, if you think about most knitting, it's a layer and another layer and another layer. And this is like, I have said this before, but I liken short row knitting, especially, you know, the butterfly kind of thing. It's like when you have the day where you're late and you go out to your car and you don't have your keys, and you run in the house and you don't have your coffee and you run back into the house and you don't, you know, there's a lot of frenetic little action. And then you sort of drive to the doctor's office, and then you run in to check in, and you don't have your insurance card because you left your purse in the car. I mean, it's an intersperse of sort of calm and sort of just knitting and flow, and then zip, 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 zip. And so it's a little bit of a balance between those two things. And I think that for people who are scared, to look at the balance, also to suggest that people, hey, just find any yarn in your stash that you have, you know, any bits and any needles, and just try to start it and just practice it before you start with your nice yarn. Because I think I find that too, that I want to jump right in, but then sometimes with any pattern, it doesn't quite make sense until I do it a little bit, and then often end up tearing it out and starting it again. So if I'm tearing out in something I don't care about, or I can put aside, that can also alleviate some of the stress. Like, you know, it's just practice. It feels a little bit easier if you know it's just practice to make a mistake, maybe.
So when you are coming up with your design, do you do that as well? Do you start out and do a practice run and see how it's going to turn out, or do you do it all on paper first and then say, oh, that's how it's going to work, and then just go ahead and knit?
It depends. Well, so you can see behind me, so of course you can see a butterfly behind me hanging on the wall. So actually those are two good examples, and then this is one that I'm working on finishing, so I'll talk to both of them. The butterfly started out I was sort of playing with short row shapes, and I came up with what, you know, to me is like a building block or a Lego block. I came up with that sort of portion with the bubble in the middle and then the 3 shapes going away from it. And I really liked it, and it really captivated me. And I had a, you know, it was just a swatch, basically. I'd made a strip. And I sewed it together so you could wear it as a cowl. I don't even know where that is anymore, but that was sort of this. And I took a picture of it, and I manipulated it as a photo, and I laid it into the design. And I said, gee, there's no way, I can't do that. There's no way I can sort of bend my knitting into making that. I really didn't think it was possible, but it was beautiful, and I wanted to try it. So this one really came out of an image that I was trying to recreate with a, you know, a template, you know, in a different thing, a stitch pattern, a cable, a piece, that, an element that I wanted to incorporate into that shape. So that's, you know, that was the genus of that one. It was so complex, though, that I think I knit it twice before I wrote anything down. I mean, other than like how many I cast on and how I started the triangle. Because I couldn't quite use both like my right brain and my left brain to sort of make it happen and record it. And then I started writing it down, but the first, you know, drafts of it without even the whole thing being done were over 40 pages long, because I wrote everything that I did down. I mean, every single thing was typed out on my laptop as I knit, which is really hard because sometimes you want to just knit. So it wasn't until I actually created, excuse me for a moment, these little mitts, ironically, that I figured out how to make those sections that I have in the knitting, the shortened parts, the little, you know, the shapes, the orange or red square, where I put the action that was happening here, like you put the directions for a cable or something earlier in the pattern, and that allowed me to really condense the length of it and not make it prohibitively, you know, overwhelming. I mean, I know it's overwhelming already, but if it were, you know, 50 pages long, people would hate me. I mean, that's my feeling. I would hate to buy a pattern and have it be 50 pages long and print it out and try to follow through it. Because in my brain, it was more simple. I just wasn't, I didn't know how to express it in the way my mind was seeing it, that could allow me to make it really without a pattern. And one of the reasons there were so many markers in it was because I kind of knew if one shape is here, the next shape is here, the next shape is here. I could follow that logic in my mind. I think the markers are very helpful also, but the markers for me were helping me place things when I had no pattern. So that's how that one.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's coming up that's beautiful behind you? Is that a new design coming out?
It is. Actually, this is my stress response to quarantine. And so I just turned it this way so you could see the start. And really, you know, this was one where I ended up with a small private knitting group doing a mystery knit along with this. And I have a lot of stress and anxiety. So in order to occupy my mind, I said, I'm just going to cast something on and I'm going to start knitting. And I offered it as a fundraiser to the group that I'm in, that people could join in. If they didn't have money, they didn't have to pay. If they had money and they wanted to support the group, great. And we did a 4-week mystery knit along where basically I was a week ahead knitting. And this was very freeform. I had no idea what I was doing when I started and what, you know, how the shapes would change and what would happen. And there was the pressure to keep it, honestly, to get it to my test knitters like a week ahead of where the mystery knitters were and to keep it going, and to finish it. So this is much more like freeform jazz. This was just, I needed something to do, and I wanted to experiment a little bit with different types of shapes, really short rows, but just kind of playing within the format. The end part was in response to some abstract artists from the 50s and 60s, not abstract, I'm sorry. God, I'm not going to think of the gentleman's name, but there's a Dutch like fabric designer named Werner Panton, who did a lot of like 60s wallpaper and crazy stuff. And, you know, it sort of has that feeling of a very graphic, very 1970s, like, you know, you walk into someone's house and they've got orange shag carpet and crazy, you know, wallpaper and that kind of thing. So just experimenting in the format, and much more playful and much less organized. Other stuff comes from more of an organized start. But for me, I need to start with an idea. Like, obviously this started, you know, you cast on like 9 stitches. The idea was a growing, you know, some type of relatively triangular shape that, you know, that grows out, which is, you know, very popular shawl shape. And it always starts, you know, with some idea of what I'm doing. I think that I am also the kind of person that also lets the work speak to me. So oftentimes I have an idea and things come up along the way that morph it or change it. And I know that that's where I'm more interesting. So if I allow the pattern to take a lead, or I come up to something, I think that some of the best things or features in some of my designs are honestly when I've gotten to a point where I'm in tears and it's not going to work. I've started it. I've put in all this work. I had this idea. I'm like, all right, this is going to be amazing. I'm going. And then all of a sudden something lands in my lap that I hadn't foreseen. And I think, oh my God, I failed. I'm going to have to bag the entire piece. And then I come up with a workaround that ends up being one of my favorite features. And I can, for instance, this is a cardigan that is very similar to the butterfly in the top. And you can see that more, excuse me, in the back of the piece here. I don't know. And when I went to split it for the sleeves, I didn't think it would have enough. You know, the sleeves were going to be too small. And I had to add a panel to the sleeves. I don't know if you can see that, maybe. So the sleeves have this straight piece here, but it ends the hips. It ends a little before the hips. The lines are very flattering because they flow down from a straight point. The sleeves, which I thought, how am I ever going to end them straight like a sleeve, end up being, to me, the confluence of a great like princess sleeve that's too long and like drags in the gravy, to actually not being that way because they cut back. So it was a marvelous accommodation that, you know, I was thinking the entire time I'm knitting the sleeves, how am I going to even out the end? How am I going to work around from, and then I ended up putting it on before I did the edging, and I really liked how it fit. I liked how it came elegantly down my hand, but it didn't impede, you know, the working part of my hand. So, you know, I'm, I think, fortunate that I can sort of squirrel my way out of a situation that's not necessarily working, and I'm not completely wedded to the original idea. But granted, I make stuff and I'm like, oh my God, that's, you know, a debacle of yarn, and, you know, but every time you do something, you learn something. So even if you're not pleased with the outcome, it's not really a waste of time. If you're handling needles and yarn, you're learning, even if you decide to pull it out or set it aside or wherever it goes, it's still, I liken my knitting to cooking out of the refrigerator too. Like you go in and you say, oh my God, there's nothing in my house, I can't eat. But you don't want to go to the store or you're tired, and you pull all this stuff out of the cabinets and take everything out of the fridge. Like, okay, that goes in the garbage, this goes in the meal. And all of a sudden you make something and it's actually tastes really good. And people want you to make it again. And you say, it'll never happen. You know, I definitely have a lot of that in my knitting world. What's a challenge now is then saying, okay, what I'm doing now for a living is to try to do that, try to replicate it, try to look at what I've created and make it again, try to take enough notes while I'm going that there's something there that I can follow so I can make it again. And in the second, usually in the second knitting, I'm refining it and I maybe typesetting it. And I try to put a lot of visual examples, because with the short rows, I think it's, you know, what am I supposed to be doing? What does it look like? Is it in the right place? It's a little bit, to me, you need three things in your knitting world. A good image, the work that you're actually doing, not all scrunched up on the needles, but looking at your work, looking at your pattern, and looking at the images provided, or going on Ravelry and downloading photos, because to me, a lot of patterns don't have as much visual reference as I want. They might have beautiful models and wonderful images, but I don't see the whole thing laid out. I want to see what I'm working on and see if I'm achieving, you know, that level of, is it work? I mean, I can see what I'm doing. Is it what I'm supposed to be doing? I can't see what I'm supposed to be doing because it's wrapped up on a form or on a human. One of the most beautiful things for me, and you know, coming in contact with you both and with Jen and the people at Plum Tree Yarn, the majority of people I've come into contact with have been so gracious, including I have a couple Facebook sort of help groups. I do have an ongoing knit along for the butterfly that has over 500 people in it on Facebook. You know, it's nice to have contact with people who are kind and are enjoying the process, and allows me to see it. The whole thing kind of took off in a way that it's hard for me to keep up with it on Ravelry. And it's harder to answer questions, I think. You can do so much visually on Facebook. So people are welcome to look for me there. I do have a kind of lame website and a limited Instagram presence if you want to look for me. So thank you.
And I love that, the shawl behind you. I've done a lot of test knitting. I bet your test knitters have fun with yours.
It's this one. What happened with this too is I got into this section, and these are some of the more longer, you know, there's a lot of rows here to the short row, and I got to the end of it and I was off. And actually I put it aside. This is another one that's coming out, but I don't have the yarn, the indie dyer yarn to make the next version of this, and this is a shawl. Well, actually this is a baby blanket, but it's going to be a shawl. And I needed to, sometimes I just need to stop. I guess that's the other thing. And one of the things that I find when knitting stuff like this that's complex, or the butterfly, is sometimes you need to set it aside for a few days. And reset your brain. And I know, because people, the worst thing that happens, I mean, because it makes me feel bad, people will reknit and reknit and reknit and continue to see and read something the wrong way. The best advice for someone who's struggling with any pattern is to put it in timeout. Let it, because you continue to see something incorrectly. Or the other thing is if you're really frustrated, but you really want to keep going, is to try to explain exactly why you're having a problem, like in a long email. I only know this because I've done it. I was going to email a designer like, oh my God, this doesn't make any sense, and I'm so upset and I can't figure it out. And in my desire to explain my confusion, I was able to figure out what was happening. So I think sometimes there's just this, I mean, I do have people write me and say, there's something wrong with your pattern, I can't figure it out. And that's all they send. And, you know, I have to say, well, I have more than one pattern. I would love to help you. I need to know what you're working on and where you are, and see if we can solve this. But you know, it's that reset of your brain that I think is difficult. You will continue to see something the wrong way, or read it the wrong way, or miss the same thing because your brain just sees it that way. And I don't know how else to explain that. I mean, you may have encountered that in your work. Sure. In the knit, like just to say, or have someone else look at it and say, what do you see here? What do you read?
When a customer comes in, when a customer is having problems and they bring the pattern, and I'm kind of out of the blue trying to sort out what their issue is on that pattern, I'll have them read the pattern to me and have them follow just that little step at a time. And usually then they say, oh, aha, I get it, because they are reading the whole thing and making the same mistake over and over. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think that the things that are, to go back to your question about complexity or hints with the butterfly, is please believe that any human in the universe can make an error in counting, especially when you use German short rows, like you can count 2 stitches. And so that's, you know, I do it, everyone does it. So that's really often the first thing, and it figuring out whether or not you want to adjust, whether or not you can adjust, and how much to pull back really depends on what your desired outcome is.
And to everyone, we just thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting your local yarn shop, whoever and wherever that might be. Again, this is Debbie RENNERT and Bobby Priest Gaines from Plum Tree Yarn Shop in Milan, Michigan.